good morning, and welcome to day 2 of the National Urban League's 18th Annual Legislative Policy Conference, coming to you virtually in 2021. Yes, I'm Mark Morial, proud to serve as President and CEO of the National Urban League and the Urban League Movement. And I'm joined by the brilliant and energetic Joy O. Cheney, the Executive Director of the National Urban League Washington Bureau. Joy, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Mark. It is great to be back after an exciting day that we had yesterday. You know, the theme of this year's conference is Beyond Recovery, the movement for an equitable normal. And we definitely moved the needle on that score yesterday. The focus was on community restoration, the future of civil rights, congressional and White House leadership were featured, and voting rights.
You know what, Joy, you are so right. Yesterday's activation, Phone to Action, was a huge success. Urban Leaguers delivered, sending a united message to members of Congress, calling for the passage of legislation to protect democracy, protect the right to vote, protect access to the ballot box, and as well as to undergird the integrity of our democracy. And we have a second activation set for today. And Joy, I'll let you tell all of our friends, all of our supporters about that.
Thank you so much, Mark. Absolutely. So today's activation is on police reform. We are urging the Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021, which provides federal guidelines to reform policing and enhance accountability for police misconduct. Specifics include banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants, restricting police access to military-grade weaponry, creating a national registry of police misconduct, improving police training and practices, and you know what, I'll say it again, increasing accountability measures for police misconduct so that we can deter police misconduct. So here's what I need you to do. Just text Justice Now, all one word, Justice Now, to 52886. Again, Justice Now to 52886. After you text, you will receive a link to our policing reform letter campaign. You'll be asked to submit basic demographic information. Then you can send a pre-written letter to your member of Congress, your senator in this case, showing your support for the bill and police accountability. 1 click, 3 minutes, and a huge difference.
Hey, Joy, thank you so very much. And this indeed is a civil rights issue. And we are so proud to have Kristen Clark, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Justice, to provide a few remarks this morning.
Hello, everyone. I want to first thank the Urban League for inviting me to speak at the 2021 Virtual Legislative Policy Conference. I also want to thank my friend, Mark Morial, for his outstanding leadership of the National Urban League. The Urban League has been a true leader and a valued partner in pushing for economic justice and equality throughout our nation's history. For over 100 years, the National Urban League has been the benchmark for community-based civil rights advocacy. That said, the Urban League is never content to rest on these laurels, as it has continued to find new ways to empower underserved communities through education, job training, housing, and community development programs. The work of the Urban League and so many other countless civil rights organizations and advocates have helped make tremendous stride in this country's march towards equality. Despite the progress that has been made, the events of this past year have highlighted the work that still needs to be done. The need to safeguard voting rights, the need for policing accountability, the need to confront the rise in hate crimes, and more. And I certainly do not need to detail the many ways that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the systemic inequalities that have existed in this nation for far too long. I know I also do not need to tell you that this work can feel daunting, but I'm here to remind you that none of these challenges are insurmountable. One of the great privileges of working as the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division is getting to see the great work happening across our nation to safeguard the civil rights of our most vulnerable communities. The Justice Department is led by an amazing team of lawyers and professionals who fight every day to make this nation a more equitable one. Our housing and civil enforcement section is ramping up its efforts to confront redlining, a pernicious practice that has denied Black people and other people of color equal access to lending and credit opportunities. As we mark 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre, we know well that the decimation of Black wealth can have impacts that are felt for generations. We're also working to combat race discrimination in school discipline. We're working to promote environmental justice with a focus on Black communities and people of color. The employment litigation section continues to challenge racial discrimination in employment, including in police departments, fire departments, and other municipal positions. Our voting section has a project underway to identify Black communities and other communities of color that still do not have the ability to elect representatives of their choice to local bodies, where so many of the day-to-day decisions that affect people's lives get made. The Civil Rights Division has continued to work in advancing civil rights legislation as well. We've made contributions to pending federal legislation like the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, and we've also supported efforts to strengthen voting rights enforcement and have called for passage of the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. We've also increased efforts to ensure that all police departments are constitutional and lawful. And to this end, we recently announced investigations of the Minneapolis Police Department and the Louisville Police Department. Work like this makes me so excited by the opportunity to stand alongside the Urban League today and to remind you of our common interest. If the moral arc of the universe is bending towards justice, I remain hopeful that it is, and it's in significant part because of the work that you all do. I look forward to building on our existing partnership and finding new ways to work with the National Urban League to advance the cause of justice in our country. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Assistant Attorney General Clark. And now, our friends at Dove are among our valued supporters and sponsors of today's program. In addition to being a major advocacy partner, Dove is also a prime driver of another piece of legislation close to our hearts at the National Urban League. And I'm speaking of the Crown Act, which seeks to end discrimination against natural Black hair in our schools and workplaces. Both Dove and the National Urban League are founding members of the Crown Coalition, a broad alliance of organizations and corporations fighting to advance the Crown Act nationally. Our goal is to create a welcoming environment for Black identity and Black beauty in every space. We encourage each and every one of you to join us in this fight and visit thecrownact.com, and there you can sign a petition. And please do not forget to contact your senator regarding this important piece of legislation. The Crown Act has passed as a state law in many states. Now we seek to have it enacted as a federal statute. We need your help, we need your support, and I know I can count on you. In the following video, Dove shares a snapshot of this effort thus far, a story of advancement and success.
We are born in this world with so many doors closed already. We've got to love who we are, flaws and all.
through our bill, SB 188, the Crown Act, we hope will create a respectful and open workplace for natural hair.
I am proud to be associated with this legislation, which across the nation is being characterized as the Crown Act.
We can move forward with confidence knowing that we now have this bill in the state of Colorado.
Hair discrimination is a type of racial discrimination that we are all committed to eradicating and exposing here in the county and across the nation.
Thank you, Doug. Now be sure to send your Justice Now text and sign the Crown Act petition today. Now, that's two things I'm asking you to do. Send your Justice Now text and sign the Crown Act petition today. We are action-oriented. That's what advocacy is all about. We want to take action. We want to make our voices heard. We want to bring it to those who are elected to represent us. In the meantime, get ready for another day of impressive panels and meaningful topics, including the future of work and rebuilding an equitable economy. On behalf of Joy and I, and all of the hardworking people all across the nation who make up the Urban League movement, thank you for taking part in the conference, and we'll see you at the next session. Now, before we move into our first panel of the day, I want to say thank you to our sponsors and partners. They've stood with the National Urban League, and without them, we could not bring this dynamic, energetic, and informative conference to you. Your generosity makes this event possible. And here they are. The leader sponsor, UPS. Our advocate sponsors, Eli Lilly and Company, Verizon, Wells Fargo, T-Mobile, Walmart, American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, Comcast, Dove, Philip Morris, and AARP. And of course, our presenting sponsor, the good folks at Johnson & Johnson, who have provided a special message for each of you. Please watch.
Hello, my name is Joy Cheney, Executive Director of the National Urban League's Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy. I want to welcome you to the Latimer Plan, Closing the Digital Divide, presented by Verizon. The pandemic brought home, like never before, the importance of digital technology to every aspect of our lives. At the same time, it exposed how lack of access spells disaster for education, employment, and opportunity, especially in communities of color. We will explore ways government and the business community can achieve universal broadband access and to provide a foundation for stable households, wealth creation, and small business success. But first, let's hear from our sponsor, Verizon.
Good morning. I am Michelle Kober, Director of External Affairs and Strategic Alliances at Verizon. Verizon is proud to sponsor the National Urban League's 18th Annual Legislative Conference. Today's conversation on closing the digital divide is one that Verizon cares deeply about. As Joy mentioned, the last year has shown us that broadband is central to our daily lives and is a critical part of this country's infrastructure. We are at a unique moment in history. Now is the time for Congress to take what we learned from the pandemic and make the long-term investments that are necessary to finally close the digital divide once and for all. This will give communities of color the ability to get the connectivity they need for education, higher paying jobs, healthcare through telemedicine, and so much more. I look forward to the discussion today, and I'm hopeful that the great work of NUL on this issue will benefit communities nationwide.
Thank you, Verizon. As many of you know, the National Urban League has prioritized closing the digital divide to support communities of color and to help achieve true equity. Here to share more about this effort is the President and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark H. Morial.
Thank you, Joy. And thanks to all of you for joining this so very important discussion. Last month, the National Urban League announced a comprehensive initiative to bring tech access and tech literacy to every African-American family and household in this nation. We call it the Latimer Plan, named after Lewis Latimer, the iconic, historic, pioneering inventor to whom this nation largely owes for its technical dominance, but who was uncredited for his innovations. The Latimer Plan was conceived to bring our community out of the margins, out of the shadows when it comes to broadband access and, if you will, technology. All Black Americans, whether of means, whether rich, whether struggling, no matter where you are, must have direct access to broadband and home devices. Now, let me make a distinction here. A mobile device, a cell phone, is important, but it is not enough. We need home-based broadband, a computer in the home, to be able to look for jobs, to be able to access online banking, to be able to provide a place where our children can do their homework. This is fundamental to what I believe is full and equal participation in this new global economy in all aspects of 21st century life. Broadband today is what electricity and indoor plumbing were to the early 20th century. It's not a nicety. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity, and it is a must-have. And the COVID crisis exposed the deep digital divide that runs through communities of color, and we have to fix it. What is that divide? Children unable to learn because they don't have access to online resources. Families who are isolated, jobs at a loss, local businesses shuttered, and we cannot allow this disparity of COVID to stand. So we want to thank our industry partners for joining in this effort, and we want to thank our partners in the civil rights community, in the labor community, in the education community, who've joined to say we support the Latimer Plan, and we want to make sure that its components and aspects are included in a jobs and infrastructure plan that Congress may enact. So we are advocates. We are going to battle this digital divide, and we have a plan to do it. We're not just talking. We're just not prognosticating, nor are we pontificating. We have a solid plan called the Latimer Plan. And we ask you to learn about it, become knowledgeable about it, and then join us in, yes, advocating for it. Back to you, Joy.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'm pleased to introduce the acting chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to address the National Urban League's annual Legislative Policy Conference. More importantly, thank you for your work on the Latimer Plan. This ambitious initiative lays out a clear vision explaining why we need to close the digital divide, and better, how to do it. So I share, co-sign, and triple sign the National Urban League's commitment to bridging this gap, and I want you to know that the FCC is pursuing a plan to expand broadband access, adoption, and affordability. So let me briefly highlight some of the agency's recent efforts to make sure no American is left offline. Like the Latimer Plan suggests, internet access is essential for modern American life. As work, school, and more have migrated online, this pandemic has made it clearer than ever before that broadband is no longer just nice to have. It's need to have for everyone, everywhere. And the good news is that the FCC is moving forward with two major efforts to help Americans get connected and stay connected. First, we are prioritizing the basic education needs of all children with a laser-like focus on a specific aspect of the digital divide that I call the homework gap. Now, to explain what it is, I often point out that when I was growing up, all I needed for nightly schoolwork was paper, a pencil, and my brother leaving me alone. But gone are the days. Now, every student needs an internet connection to do their homework. In fact, during this pandemic, they often needed it just to go to school. But we know that as many as 16.9 million children in the United States do not have broadband at home. These kids fall into the homework gap, and it hits students of color especially hard. In fact, during the pandemic, 1 out of 3 kids in Black, Latino, and American Indian and Alaska Native households struggled without internet access at home. I believe the homework gap is the cruelest part of the digital divide, and at the FCC, we are finally making it a priority to fix it. In May, we adopted rules to establish a new Emergency Connectivity Fund program. This program will provide schools and libraries with laptop and tablet computers, Wi-Fi hotspots, and broadband connectivity devices to help students who lack reliable internet access at home. With a nearly $7.2 billion budget from Congress, this is the largest single effort in our nation's history to make sure all students have access to the broadband and devices they need for school. Second, the FCC just launched by far the largest ever broadband affordability program, and it's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. It's an effort to get every household online and make sure cost is not a barrier. So if you qualify for Medicaid, SNAP, free and reduced school lunches, Lifeline, Pell Grants, or other aid programs, you can now go to a local broadband provider and get a discount of up to $50 a month for broadband service, or up to $75 a month if you live on tribal lands. And participants can also receive a one-time $100 discount on a computer or tablet. But people won't receive this help if they don't sign up. So we need trusted voices like the National Urban League to let people know that support is available and to tell them how they can get it. That's where I need to thank you again. On the very first day of enrollment for this program, you announced that the National Urban League would work to promote consumer awareness about the emergency broadband benefit. In fact, if you go to the home page for the Latimer Plan, one of the first things you see is a big red button urging people to apply for the emergency broadband benefit right now. No one should have to choose between paying the internet bill or buying groceries or medicine. And by helping us spread the word about the emergency broadband benefit and getting people signed up, we are helping pay the bills a little easier for Americans across the country. So thank you for all you're doing to help make this program a success. Working together, we can bring broadband to more Americans and come out of this pandemic stronger and more connected than ever before. I believe it's possible, and I bet you do too. So let's get to it.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenworcel. Here with his perspective on the digital divide and the Latimer Plan, please welcome founder, chair, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners, Mr. Robert Smith.
Thank you so much for inviting me to spend a few minutes with you today. We all know that economic inequality has been part and parcel with the Black experience in America. We all know that this past year and a half has exposed a massive gap between the economically enfranchised and disenfranchised as never before. And we all know that a growing digital divide threatens to only exacerbate these longstanding problems, just at a time when technology could actually and finally be closing that gap. We all get the problem. Each of us sees it every day. I'm here to talk about a couple of solutions that energize me and give me hope. Because even during this painful period of time, we've seen a whole lot of people in positions of power actually start walking the walk and begin to turn ideas into real action. One example of this is the Latimer Plan, perhaps the most comprehensive how-to guide ever assembled on combating digital poverty. It takes the issue of broadband deserts, something people have been saying and warning about for years, but is frankly only grown worse, and actually starts to implement some sensible, achievable outcomes. Closing the digital divide means ensuring broadband internet is not only available everywhere, but affordable to all. Infrastructure is nothing more than pipes and cables if the people it's meant to serve can't afford to use it. Addressing the cost of service is a critical piece of the connectivity puzzle. Beyond access and affordability of service, we must also democratize access to the hardware and software that people need to take full advantage of the internet's capabilities. Finally, the entire connective ecosystem will require an array of knowledge workers who can continually maintain and improve it, so its benefits will last well into the future. That makes the investment an engine for job creation as well. The Latimer Plan is built on the simple premise that you need to be holistic and systemic to solve these problems. Some of you may have heard about a solution that I've been working on alongside some pretty extraordinary partners. We're calling it the Student Freedom Initiative. And in many ways, it follows the same playbook that makes the Latimer Plan so promising. SFI touches on several issues, most prominently providing solutions to high interest rate student loans that contribute to the disproportionate debt burden that Black and brown college students face. We're also investing in the technology infrastructure that HBCUs need to be competitive. In partnership with Cisco and ABC Technologies, we're investing $100 million into network and security technology to unlock the potential of the entire HBCU ecosystem. The headlines of the past month are proof enough of the threat posed by cyber attacks. Through our investment, we plan to increase the resiliency of HBCUs, protect their federal student aid funding streams, and provide them with peace of mind while creating an ecosystem for jobs through regular maintenance and upgrades. Another driving principle that can be seen in both the Latimer Plan and the Student Freedom Initiative is a recognition that we can't do this alone. As you know, the Latimer Plan has already received endorsements from a broad coalition of organizations, from the National Action Network to the Business Roundtable. We realize that even in the most optimistic scenarios of what Congress might do, this problem can't be solved without the private sector stepping up. That's why I've been calling on the country's largest corporations to devote 2% of their earnings to initiatives that can help deliver racial equity. I call it the 2% solution. And if enough companies engage in deploying their capital and expertise towards helping Black communities, we can drive lasting, systemic, and sustainable change. The most successful solutions will be the ones that maximize impact by forging new partnerships, like the one between Cisco, ABCT, and our nation's HBCUs. We are looking to catalyze a lot more of this kind of work. When we do, we will discover that the big problems that seem intractable can actually be broken down into more bite-sized components. Let me give you an example. We can reach half of the US Black population in the United States by focusing on just 6 US cities in the South: Atlanta, Memphis, New Orleans, Birmingham, Houston, and Charlotte, and the communities that surround them. Setting aside for a moment a national implementation of the Latimer Plan, if we can just bring it to those 6 places, we make a massive dent in the digital divide. And in doing so, along with spillover to surrounding regions, would result in more than $100 billion in growth for Black communities. We would create a whole new strata of jobs in the Black community, working to maintain or fully utilize broadband networks that has never existed before at this scale. That would represent the single largest investment in racial equity in modern American history. I don't suggest solving these problems will be easy. There's a reason they've lingered for generation after generation, but I'm optimistic because we've never had better tools, technology, or know-how to scale up and change quickly. And after the past year we've been through, we've never had a greater will among my corporate colleagues to create game-changing outcomes. I want to thank you for everything you've been doing day in and day out. The National Urban League has frankly been banging the drum on these issues when not a whole lot of people wanted to hear about them. Let's make sure we don't let this moment pass without breaking down the systems and building them back stronger and better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Our panel discussion is up next, and we've gathered an especially strong group who have a lot to say on tech access and its role in building a more equitable and a more just America. We've got lots of ground to cover, so let's get right to the introduction, starting with Marita Coley-Flippin, President and CEO of the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, also known as MMTC. Blair Levin, non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program and lead writer of the National Urban League's Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion. Angela Seifer, Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, also known as NDIA. Edward Smitty Smith, Executive Director of the Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion, and also Managing Partner of DLA Piper's Washington, D.C. office. Thank you so much for being here. Some of you all I've been working with for a very long time, especially on the Lewis Latimer Plan, which is the National Urban League's plan, comprehensive plan and strategy with plenty of solutions for closing the digital divide. And Marita also was a writer on, MMTC was on the Latimer Plan. So we're so glad to have all three of you here today. But let's take it back a step and let's begin by explaining the digital divide. What does the term mean in the real world and what's its impact on African Americans and other communities of color? I'll let anyone start, but I'm going to go ladies first. Marita, would you like to begin with that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Joy, and NUL. Congratulations on your legislative conference, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to implement the administration of the Latimer Plan. The digital divide, I've been in this space a very long time, and the digital divide is a term that we adopted to, and Blair might have adopted it, but we adopted it to talk about the difference between what we called then the information haves and have-nots. And so today that gap still persists in terms of the digital haves and have-nots, and it's people who have access to the internet, access to computers, proficiency with using the internet and computers, and being able to have a first-class digital lifestyle that includes, all aspects of life. So that's basically what we talk about. Our communities, African American communities, led in the adoption of smartphones, but we have tended to lag when it has gone to the actual actualization of the vision of digital literacy and the ability to use the digital platforms in order to enrich the qualities of our lives. So it's really great that the National Urban League is getting involved in this and expanding the knowledge about the digital divide and working to close those divides.
Thank you so much. Blair, I want to go to you next because one of the things we talked about was, this has been happening a long time. This is not new. Matter of fact, the National Urban League in 2018 put out our State of Black America report on the digital divide, and our index showed that all of the gains that were being brought about with this digital boom were not shared equally. But you were even talking about it far before then. Can you talk a little bit about the National Broadband Plan and what it said and knew about the digital divide?
Sure. But let me just start by saying, Marita noted that I've been doing this for a long time, but it was really Larry Irving who I worked with during the Clinton administration, who came up with the phrase the digital divide. And what he was talking about then was how some communities had access to dial-up internet, but other communities didn't. And I think that illustrates the point that the kind of technical definition of what is a digital divide has changed, but the meaning of it has not. And the fundamental meaning is, do you have the ability to fully participate in the economic and civic life of your community? Back in the early 90s, when I first joined with the FCC, you kind of didn't need it, but today you really do. And the access to dial-up, which is what Larry was working for in the late 90s, that would no longer be sufficient. And so in 2009 and 10, me and a bunch of other folks were at the FCC writing a document that had three fundamental points. We need networks everywhere, everybody on, and we need to utilize the networks to improve how we deliver essential services like education, healthcare, workforce development. The Latimer Plan is not dissimilar, but the details are quite different because it's 10 years later. And the single most important part of the National Broadband Plan, the single most important sentence, was the sentence in the beginning of the chapter on implementation that read, "This plan is in beta and always will be." And one of the lessons we've learned is we need to continually upgrade. So one of the most important chapters to me of the Latimer Plan is, how do we institutionalize this notion that we always want to be thinking about? How do we use technology to bridge divides, to bring people together, to have a more equitable and inclusive society? How do we measure that? And how do we have a process of constant improvement? So I was very proud of what we did in 2010, but obviously it needs to be updated in 2020.
We're going to talk about the Latimer Plan. It too is always in beta because things change at the speed of innovation. But before we talk about the Latimer Plan, I want to just make sure we're setting the scene. We've always known about the digital divide, but things got worse. The gap got wider in this past year. Smitty, if you don't mind, I'd love for you and for everyone to know, we call him Edward Smitty Smith. It's his nickname in a term of dear love. Smitty, what happened during the pandemic? And what did it teach us about the digital divide?
Well, thank you very much, Joy, and it's an honor to be here today talking with you all. It taught us a lot about how important this tool, the internet and broadband, is to our ability to fully participate in our society, and what happens when certain other institutions are not functioning well. What happens to those who are on the wrong side of the digital divide and that are not able to rely upon that resource, whereas the rest of us are. And I think what it did and what we saw, and this was a catalyzing point that led us to really focus on this issue in the Latimer Plan, was it exacerbated pre-existing divisions and pre-existing gaps. The economic and the human and the social and the civic costs of those gaps were highlighted for everyone to see in a far more extraordinary way than we've been able to see before. So as you say, the digital divide, is something that we've been aware of, something that we've been focused on for policymakers and governments have been focused on for decades, trying to close. But then at the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic crises that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's an economic crisis that impacted people at different points in the social economic scale very differently. The social crises and the challenges that were created, the civil unrest and the challenges that were created out of the murder of George Floyd and others, all of these things came together and made it clear that at this particular point in time, not being connected was far more costly, and indeed might do far more than just cost you economically, might cost you your life. The populations that we were always concerned about, were also populations that had far worse health outcomes pre-pandemic, and then we see it during the pandemic, and we see how much worse it becomes. These were populations that were suffering from greater degrees of job instability, or were economically disadvantaged pre-pandemic. The pandemic hits, and we saw how much worse it is when you don't have broadband. These are populations that were suffering from adverse educational outcomes, and then we see what happens when your child can no longer attend school, but also can't even attend school online. And so, these are items that sort of were put to the fore, and then that is why we ended up focusing on them, particularly in the Latimer Plan.
That's great. And, just Smitty, I want to stay with you for a second, because I know you've talked a lot about this, and then others can answer as well. But so much of the conversation is about availability. And we know that that's important. In fact, it's part of the Latimer Plan. But affordability is also important. Can you talk about the numbers, and maybe others want to jump in here as well? When you look at the size of the problem, where's the focus?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's the fact of the matter is, the digital divide is not a uniform thing. It's not monolithic. There are a lot of different components that lead to the digital divide. In the broadest, most general sense, we're talking about the divide between those who have broadband and those who, and those who don't. But then you sort of peel back the onion and you start looking at, what that population looks like at a more granular level, and it shows you a lot, and we start seeing how much attention gets paid to one part of the problem versus another. So if you look at broadband adoption generally across the board, there's about 93 million Americans in this country right now that do not subscribe to broadband. But then you have to say, well, okay, well, why don't they? And if you look a level deeper, there are those who do not subscribe because broadband's not available where they are. Or there are those who do not subscribe even though there's broadband available where they are, but they don't subscribe for other reasons. And as it turns out, between 69 and 78%, 78 million Americans are not subscribing, even though there's broadband where they are. And so then you start looking, well, why is it that they're not subscribing? And the fact is, when polled, the overwhelming majority of those are not subscribing because of reasons of affordability. But then if you look at where we dedicate our energy and our resources and our time, and where government dollars are invested most heavily, they're most heavily invested at solving the issue of broadband availability, whether or not broadband is deployed in a particular area. We think, and that is something that needs to be looked at from a lot of different directions, and looked at in addressing a lot of different elements, and particularly the affordability element, because again, that is the number one reason why people do not subscribe to broadband today. And if we only focus on broadband availability, if we do not look at this adoption issue, if we do not look at affordability as a contributor to why people don't adopt, then we're going to be missing the overwhelming majority of Americans that are not connected, and that's a big mistake.
I think that's right. Marita or Blair, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was, one of the things I think the Latimer Plan does a really great job of is to emphasize the importance. This is a both and kind of solution that's required. Of course, we have, even in rural areas, as we know, 22% of rural Americans are people of color. Right. And so it's not that the rural deployment issue is not important. It's that you can't just all of a sudden shift all your resources to deployment and forget about the fact of all of the people who have not yet adopted. And this is we've been talking MMTC, NUL, NAACP, we've been talking about this issue pretty much since about 2009, this whole issue of adoption or lack of adoption, and looking at what are the causes. Is it a affordability issue? Is it that people don't have it? And is it that people don't know how to use it? And I think that, 10, 15 years later, what we're really, really seeing is that as digital proficiency, as digital availability has increased, a lot of the reason why you don't see people adopting is that they can't afford it. Even during the pandemic, a lot of what happened during the pandemic with the Keep Americans Connected pledge that the FCC asked the carriers to enter into, some people couldn't afford it. So then they had an opportunity to reach out and make some kind of an opportunity with their provider in order to get connected because they couldn't afford it. And so now we're recognizing that affordability is the number one issue, but it's not the only issue. So we have to address all of those issues.
That's right. And I'm going to have Blair talk about a few of those other issues. Blair, let's just go back to you really quickly. So we know that, availability, we know that affordability is a problem, but the Latimer Plan doesn't just talk about that. It talks about other types of adoption issues as well as utilization. Can you just fill us in a little more about what that is and what's the size of that problem?
Sure. So we might think of the availability gap as how many homes have no network that is available. We might think of the adoption gap as how many homes haven't adopted it. We should also think of a utilization gap, which is the gap between how we're using it today and how we could be using it to solve some of society's biggest problems. You know, one of the biggest problems that we're going to have coming out of COVID is we have a whole generation of students who were basically out of school for a year or plus. So their reading scores are going to be much lower than they would have been if they had been in school. And sociologists can predict, and this is kind of a sad statistic, but true, the number of prison beds a society needs by looking at fourth grade reading scores. Well, our reading scores are going to be down, but we could solve that problem with one-on-one tutoring if we enlisted lots of people to tutor online with the kids. But to do that, we need the kids to adopt. So you see this kind of symmetry between the utilization of the technology, but also the adoption of the technology. So when you look at education, you look at healthcare, you look at jobs. When people lose jobs today and they want to upskill, they want to search, train for a job, interview for a job, apply for a job, you have to do it online. But if you're unemployed, you might not be able to afford to stay online. So the Latimer Plan tries to tie together all of these things so that we not only improve the adoption, but once we have everybody online, and I will say on adoption, I'm so glad Angela is joining us, and she also helped write the Latimer Plan because she's working in the fields on this. Once you do that, there's a tremendous opportunity to solve some of the problems that have just really hurt this country for many, many years in terms of disparity about how we distribute these essential services.
That's right. Thank you, Blair. Angela, Blair said it all. We know that you worked on adoption for the nation. And what are beyond affordability? So we're gonna go back to that. We know that's important. What are the other adoption hurdles that we have?
The biggest adoption hurdle we have beyond affordability is digital literacy. And we can't assume that just because everybody's carrying around one of these that they have digital literacy skills. When my middle child was in high school, I was like, okay, I'm going to have these girls help me move, her and her friends move some information, one spreadsheet to another. And they were all like, we're not sure how to use a spreadsheet. It's like, what? What is going on? How come you don't know how to use a spreadsheet? So just because they have this device and they can TikTok like nobody's business does not mean they know how to use a spreadsheet. And so those are the skills that we need to have today. And it's the kind of thing where we will never be done teaching digital literacy. Are any of us done learning anything else, right? And then technology always changes. So this job is never done. Sometimes when I'm feeling really morbid, I'll be like, you know what? We're never going to solve the digital divide. And people are like, shut up, Angela. Yes, we are. Like, well, but the technology is going to keep changing. So we have to make sure we are constantly keeping up so that we're continuously solving the next divide.
That's right. So let's talk about solutions, because one of the things we wanted to do, and by we, I mean all of you helped write the plan. What do we talk about in the Latimer Plan in terms of solutions for closing the digital divide? Let's start with the solutions around affordability. Smitty, I'll go back to you for that answer, and then we'll talk about some of the other gaps we have solutions for closing.
Thank you. To start off, I'd like to sort of point out something that I think is really important that Angela noted, which is that this is a continuous problem that needs to be solved in real time going forward, always. And therefore, we can't have static solutions. We can't think, oh, but didn't we close the digital divide yesterday or last week? The fact of the matter is, that because the technology is adapting and changing constantly, because use cases are changing constantly, because people are changing constantly, we're always going to have to come back and address this, which means that we need to have sustainable and comprehensive solutions that are going to keep on moving forward, just as the technology and the uses and the people do. And so, that takes us to, how do we close the digital divide on the affordability issue? Just as it's not enough to say, well, we put a lot of money in last year, shouldn't that have solved the problem? It's not enough to say, well, we, invested several billions of dollars into an emergency broadband benefit. That's a wonderful start, but it's for a point in time, for a period of time. We can't say, oh, well, we funded, we provided more funding for E-rate last year. We provided more funding for Lifeline last year. It has to be something that can continue going on forward. So in the Latimer Plan, we look at the affordability gap and we talk about addressing it in two principal ways. One, we say, look, a permanent or sustained broadband benefit, is something that we could support and would be a very good idea. There's always going to be a population in this country, no matter what the price of broadband is, that cannot afford it at that price. And therefore, there's always going to be a population that's going to need a sustainable subsidy that is going to allow them to afford broadband. But then we also say, look, in the event that a sustainable or permanent broadband subsidy isn't something that is manageable for whatever the range of reasons may be, most of them political, then what can we do to reform some of the existing tools that we have? So we have the Lifeline program. The Lifeline program is a program that now 90% of the time is used for paying for mobile, but when we talk about closing the digital divide, we're really talking about in-home. And so what can we do to take the Lifeline program and turn it into something and expand it into something that can solve the in-home broadband gap? And when looking at that, that means that we're going to be, substantially expanding the universe of subscribers. And right now, Lifeline is already struggling to stay afloat just with the very small subscriber base that it has relative to the number of people who are eligible. About 8 million people who are using Lifeline today. There's over 30 million people who are eligible for Lifeline, and yet the existing contribution framework make it very, very difficult for that to be sustainable. So what we propose is really a sort of multi-tiered and multi-sourced approach, which looks at it and says, this is a critical resource, something that we recognize societally is important for us, economically, it's important for the nation's economy. So how about we invest in it like it is? And so that means, that there's a place for appropriated funds to go towards funding a sustained Lifeline expansion. We talk about, the ability to use proceeds from spectrum auctions. The FCC raises billions of dollars every year with spectrum auctions. We just had a very successful one, raised $80 billion, over $80 billion. That is spectrum that will go towards building out 5G across the country. But shouldn't we also worry about whether or not that 5G is meeting people that can actually pay for it? So having a tie between the money that goes towards creating our incredibly powerful networks and allowing people to afford it, I think makes logical sense, it makes economic sense, and I think that is something that's necessary. Also, to the extent that there are sort of economic instruments, reverse auctions, for example, that are used to pay for broadband deployment, we propose taking some of the remainder amounts from those auctions. A successful reverse auction is one that ends up funding a deployment at a lower price than what was budgeted, which means that there's going to be an excess, and that excess can also be used to help fund adoption programs and affordability programs.
Well, wait, Smitty.
Yes.
You are too smart for me. What does all of that mean? So just tell me, when we break it down, is it that we need to get people to pay in a little more to make sure we cover this? Is that the bottom line?
Thank you, Joy. Actually, you're right. All right. To take it up a level, no, not and to not get, it's easy for me to get too excited and get too wonky about this. But so yes, the point is we value this. It's important. It's important for people's lives. It's important not just for the individual that uses it, but also for their entire community, for our entire economy, that they be able to use it. We all benefit from that use. And as such, we need to find ways to pay for it. And there are existing resources out there that we can use to pay for it. And the benefits of paying for it far outweigh the costs. That's the point.
That is the point. So
if I can jump in a little bit.
Go ahead.
What Smitty was saying, because Smitty's DC You know, his dad was an astrophysicist. He's a really smart guy. I'm from Detroit, and I keep so much of this.
You're also brilliant.
You know, because, you know, for instance, Smitty talked about Lifeline. First of all, for our audience, for people who aren't inside the Beltway, when I talk about Lifeline, nobody knows what it is. When I say Obama phone, people are like, oh, and then people start complaining about, I don't like the Obama phone. You know, you can only get 250 minutes. It's an ugly phone. It doesn't work well, whatever. What was so beautiful for me, having worked in this space for so long, is how the Latimer Plan and, you know, NUL and all the people that you brought together, you came up with this really like hot way of talking about, you know, the next generation of Lifeline, Lifeline Mobile and Lifeline Med, Lifeline with Lifeline Home, Lifeline Ed,
Workforce, yes.
all of the different ways that we can take the existing infrastructure of having funds contributed to, you know, used to be your phone bill, and now we've advocated that this be extended to, broadband. And now it's like what NUL has done with the Latimer Plan is we can take the same model and then we can expand it and make people want to adopt, because I might not want an Obama phone, but I might like to be part of this whole Lifeline Mobile, Lifeline Ed movement. Lifeline Jobs. I can actually use, get access to the internet and use my benefits, my emergency broadband benefit or permanent broadband benefit, to find a job or to get, job training. And so I think that the things that the Latimer Plan has done in terms of reimagining things that Smitty and Blair and I have worked on for so long at the FCC, and actually making them like, oh, this is something that's really good. And this is a way, if NUL is doing it and NUL, talks to us about it, then this is something that we can adopt. So, yeah.
Angela, though, isn't it so important, before we talk about what else we can do, isn't it so important that we make sure people are using the emergency broadband benefit that's already out there? Can you talk a little bit about what FCC has already done this year in terms of an emergency benefit program, how you get on? And also, what else is there that we should be asking for?
The emergency broadband benefit is $3.2 billion. Sounds like a big number, right? But there's a whole bunch of folks who are eligible. You might be eligible. You should go check, right? It is the FCC is facilitating this, and it goes through your internet service provider. So your internet service provider, if you are eligible, can put $50 towards your bill. And so it's a significant investment. And it's the first time that the federal government has acknowledged that affordability is an issue, and we're going to address it with money, right? Like, we're going to put a resource to addressing the affordability issue. We haven't seen that before. So that's really the first step. But I think it's important for all of us to say the federal government did actually invest in affordability, but unintentionally, with CARES Act money. Because with the CARES Act, they said local governments and state governments, we're going to give you some money and you do what you need to do. And some of them used it to buy people's internet. And they bought it to buy devices, and they bought it to buy tech support and guidance. And so the federal government has been in this business before, but not intentionally. This is the first time they've intentionally been addressing the affordability piece. And I think what we learn right now from those bulk purchase agreements that were occurring with the CARES Act money and are still occurring to this day, and what we learned from the emergency broadband benefit, all that right now is something we need to all continuously be talking about, so we can make sure that that permanent broadband benefit fully meets our needs. So, for example, one of the things that we've learned is that without the kind of outreach that's needed to the households who are eligible, some folks are like, nope, I don't want it. Free internet sounds like a scam to me, forget it. It does sound like a scam, really. Free internet sounds scammy. So who is it that's convincing folks it's not a scam? We have to make sure that we wrap that into the plan.
That's right. Blair, can you talk about the digital navigators solution that we propose in the Latimer Plan?
Sure. And it's one of the things that really comes out of the work that Angela and her colleagues have done, which is really getting people in the community to help others in the community both adopt and utilize it better. And you're not only helping people get online, you're helping train them to essentially be able to do jobs in the future, because all jobs in the future will have some element of online skills. You're also, the navigators themselves are learning skills that will be useful to them. So whether you think about it as kind of similar to Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program, the Peace Corps program, it is that combination of people helping people. But what we're really looking for is in the communities that they come from, particularly those communities which historically have been both marginalized and are underconnected. So that's a mechanism to do that. A lot of people have been pushing for that. You saw some of that, frankly, with some of the CARES Act money, not deliberately in that same way, but where, governors, Republican governors of red states, realizing that they had a problem when people couldn't gather physically together, but they still needed to get kids connected for education and stuff, using people to help with that kind of technical knowledge. So we want to expand that program, build on that. And you might think of it as a surge to make sure that, in the same way that there was kind of a surge of education in this country back in the 1800s, which led to higher literacy rates overall, we need the same thing for digital literacy now. We need to devote resources to it. And then I think future generations will adopt it, though, as Angela said, it's a lifelong process, or it's a many generation process.
Thanks, Blair. Well, you said something and it made me think. Many of those who are watching us today are going to say, if we have all this agreement, Republicans, Democrats, everyone's saying this is a problem. People in rural America, which has plenty of people of color, but is predominantly white, people in urban America, plenty of diversity, but predominantly of color. What's the barrier? What is that? Is this just a done deal? Are we just going to have a permanent broadband benefit and, everything's going to be solved? What are some of the hurdles that people might hear from their members of Congress, and what should they be saying to them? Not lobbying here, just educating folks. What are some of the things that they should be engaging with policymakers on? What might be the hurdles to getting this fixed once and for all? And I will let anyone start.
Well, if I could take that, just because first of all, let us all acknowledge a problematic reality of our lives. Washington is a dysfunctional town. It does not do meaningful legislation. There's not a spirit of compromise. This is sad but true. Many members of Congress now go there not to legislate, not to cut deals, not to bring home the bacon to their congressional district, but they come there to tweet. And that's just really a big problem. So I think we have a cultural problem. Having said that, I think broadband is an issue on which we can overcome some of the big political divides. When we started working on the Latimer Plan, I went to some of my Republican friends, because I've been in politics long enough, back in the days when Democrats and Republicans disagreed about things, but they could still be friends. And I would say, do you agree that America would be a better, stronger, more prosperous place if we had networks everywhere? They always said yes. Would you agree that America would be a better, stronger, more prosperous place if we had everybody connected, and if we use those connections to improve how we deliver those services? They said yes. And then I said, and are market forces alone going to do it? And they said no. Okay, we have agreement on the vision. We have agreement on the need for government to act. And now what we need to do is try to figure out the right compromises for how government acts. And that's not easy. There's going to be disagreements about how much money to spend. There are some people in good faith who believe we should never give free internet. People should have to contribute at least $5 or something. Well, these are the kinds of things we have to work out. There's some who believe that a digital navigators program will be a waste of money. We have to convince them it won't. There are lots of details that have to be done. But we kind of have to overcome the current DC culture of dysfunction and of trying to go for the headlines instead of work out the details. At least that's my point of view of this.
Yes.
Smitty, go ahead. Sorry about that.
So I think everything Blair said is absolutely right. I think the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that typically legislative packages to solve problems like these, big problems, are big packages with many, many zeros. And frequently they have a lot of different programs within them intended to solve the problem of one constituency or another, solve the needs, talk to the needs of one senator or another. And that's how this process works. These pieces of legislation gets patched together with everyone sort of putting in what they think is important for their constituents and their state or their district. But when that happens, and when you propose spending, tens of billions or nearly $100 billion, which is some of these proposals are, we're talking about a lot of money, $100 billion. It's important that in burning through the amount of political capital that's necessary to make that happen, we don't leave on the cutting room floor large percentages, large parts of our country, large populations. And so, it's important that these packages, because they're all born of compromise, are able to move forward while, instead of just scratching the need of one group and leaving another group unsatisfied or unmet, actually trying to solve the needs of a lot of different groups. And right now, the population that's the largest population of unconnected people, or the population of people for whom affordability is an issue. And so we can't move forward in solving an availability and deployment part of the problem, and then not solving the other part. Because if you do so, it's going to be really, really hard to put together the coalition that's necessary to come back and get those that have been left to the sidelines over and over again throughout time. The poor, the communities of color. All of this has to happen together.
Can I offer that the fact that we actually have more people who are unconnected because they can't afford it is not a fact that everybody understands. So that's an education piece that we really need to spread that message. There is an assumption by, I'm sure, very nice, well-meaning people who think that it's about availability, right? And so we have to get past that. There's also the assumption that if it were just available everywhere, but we have places where it's available and people still don't adopt it. So that shows that we have to go at this in a much more intense kind of way around the adoption side than we have been, because we really, other than this 3.2 billion, there's nothing there, right? Like, what are we using to pay for digital literacy? What are we using for digital navigators? All of that right now, CARES Act money, well, that's about to end.
And Marita, let's just talk again about why this is so important. What have we learned in COVID-19 that reminds us like healthcare, education, workforce? I'd love for you to touch a little bit on that, on why this matters.
These issues that we've been focusing on, I guess, said Angela, Blair, Smitty, we've been focusing on these issues for over a decade. But what COVID did is that it put everything in your face, because, before COVID, you might have been able to go to the library or go to, a fast food chain or go somewhere to get access to the internet if you didn't have it at home. When COVID occurred, even the people who didn't have internet at home then also lost out on their the alternatives of getting it at school or getting it at a library or at a fast food place. And it immediately resulted in, we were all talking about the homework gap before COVID, particularly Acting Chair Rosenworcel and FCC Commissioner Starks were, we all worked on, we've got to do something about the homework gap. COVID said, I got something for you. This makes what we were talking about with the homework gap seem like, just sort of an experiment. All of a sudden, the kids who, had internet at school, but didn't have it at home, but were able to overcome it. And then they're not going to school. All the schools aren't equal. I have nieces and nephews. Some of them were from schools, that had resources, and they sent them home with computers and, hotspots if they needed. And then other kids whose schools didn't send them anywhere. So it's really important that we equalize, this entire space and make sure that we're addressing the needs of, our young people. And there was one other thing I wanted to talk about that came out from this. A lot of churches, a lot of Black churches weren't able to operate because they weren't connected to the internet, or they didn't have the right kind of proficiency. And when we talk about trusted advisors, everyone on this panel has mentioned before, NUL is a trusted advisor. The Latimer Plan, that's one of the reasons why the Latimer Plan is so wonderful, because it's coming from a trusted advisor like NUL. We were on a call last week with churches, with Black church leaders, and they were looking for advice and what they could do. So we were able to give them the blueprint of the Latimer Plan in terms of what kinds of things they can do to call their members of Congress and let them know this is what we need, because members of Congress respect constituents. And so we're empowering our constituents through NUL, through the faith-based outreach. And I'm optimistic that we really are going to come to some agreement on this.
I think that's right. I'm so glad you mentioned churches, because when we talk about adoption and we talk about digital literacy, there are a lot of older Americans who are out there demanding broadband now, or wondering, how is everyone getting online? And this is important. I need to figure out. They may not have the word, but they know this is important, in part because they wanted to connect with their community and they wanted to connect with their churches. For those who could get online, they did start having services online. So, this is a part of our national framework when we talk about, it's not just about access to the economy, it's access to community. And so just as we, begin to wrap up, I want to give each of you an opportunity to just, give us a parting thing about what we should care most about in terms of this digital divide. If you're, what part of it do you care most about? What part of it do you want to see prioritized as we go forward in this next year? Angela, I won't start with you because you were like, let me think about it. Blair.
I'll start. The top priority for next year is a permanent subsidy that means that no matter what your income, you can get online, your kids can get online, you can do all those things which now can really only be done online to help with economic security, to help with healthcare and engage, as you said, with your community. But I also want to think about the next 10 years. And that is, and we start with the Latimer Plan, we started really by asking the question, how can we use information technology to improve the lives of people? That's a great thing. And, last month, you might remember you were testifying on a panel talking about the need for universal broadband. There was someone named Max Steyer who was testifying with you. He runs something called Partnership for Public Service. And they did a study which showed that the IRS pays $41 every time they have to answer a phone call. But if they do it on a chat function, they save all this money. Well, that's great. And we should want to save the government money. But here's the thing that I know. If you're a working person and you have kids and you work hard from 9 to 5, and then you come home and you feed the kids and all this, it's very difficult to go to a government office to get assistance with something you might need assistance for. But if you can chat with somebody online after you put the kids to bed, your life will be improved. And every major company in America knows that, and they all provide that. The federal government does not, state governments do not, local governments do not. So we have a whole section in the Latimer Plan about how do we improve the way government delivers services so that people can get those services and get the help they need when they want it. Just kind of like streaming video. What do you want to watch? When you want to watch it? It should be the same way with how we help people. And that's what I think is a real long-term need.
And, one of the things that's important to note is this is so important for communities of color because, and low-income communities who are interacting with the government, state, local, federal, and often at their time of need, and people need to have access to these services. And I know we didn't talk enough really about telehealth rather, but in terms of telehealth, 50 to 175 times more telehealth being used than it did before this crisis. And that's not going to go back. We're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. And so many benefits for people because, as Blair said, just like with government services, folks who are working moms or who have elderly people that they're caring for or have transportation issues, the ability to see a doctor in your home That is tremendous privilege. But let's keep going. That's one of the things I think is most important. Marita, what do you think are the priorities in the broadband discussion?
Well, MMTC focused in on the jobs provision of the Latimer Plan, and between the jobs and what a digitally proficient society can do in terms of the unemployed and the underemployed. That, to me, that is one of the most important things, because actually bridging the wealth gap, making sure that people, are trained, people have jobs or apprenticeships, those are things that can solve some of the other issues in terms of affordability of the internet and proficiency and literacy of the internet. So I'd like to really think about how we can focus on affordability and literacy in terms of people really understanding and knowing how being online, being proficient online can get you the kind of job where you can actually, stay at home and, telework, because a lot of people in our communities had the kind of jobs where they couldn't do that. And so that's why you saw so many people dropping out, because they couldn't leave their kids at home. And so I'd like to focus on how do we get the affordability issue solved and get the literacy issue solved really quickly, because those will solve a lot of the other problems in our society.
Thanks so much, Angela. And then Smitty, you're going to have the last word. Angela, what's important to you all?
I encourage us to think about it as, just as Marita was describing, the end goal are these other things, right? The end goal is not technology. The end goal is the improvement in how we live. But how do we get, so those are human aspects of all this. How we get there is also a human aspect, right? So who's in charge of helping folks make sure they know how to use the technology? Who's that tech support? Where's the guidance? That human aspect can't be left out. And we have left it out, right? During this pandemic, folks were like, everybody needs technology, like hair on fire, throwing hotspots out the window kind of situation, because there was like we have to give people technology, but we didn't address the human side. And I think we learned a really important lesson, and we have to make sure we do that this time.
Thank you. Smitty, the executive director of the Latimer Plan, take us out.
Thank you. Yeah, you're going to hear from me a lot of what you've heard in focusing on that human aspect, focusing on the issue of affordability, which is a human question, focusing on what can we do and how can we better serve populations that are unserved. We right now are looking at what is really one of the most significant civil rights issues of our time. The internet and telecommunications technologies, they're among the most useful and most powerful engines of economic and social activity that we have today. And to fully participate in this modern economy, and engage socially and civically, you have to be on the internet. If you're not, then you're at the margins. And so this can affect anything from your ability to work, for ability of your children to get education, for you to access healthcare. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing it in some ways that really are a question of life or death for people today. Right now, every time we turn around, we talk about the Internet of Things, and we talk about how things are connected. And when you look at connectivity and we say our refrigerators are connected, our toasters are connected, our cars are connected, every wearable device you can imagine is connected. Well, the last thing on that list cannot be our fellow citizens. It can't be us. And I'll tell you a very quick story that goes to just how important this is, life or death, right? I live in Washington, D.C. I grew up here in Washington, D.C. Dysfunctional town, but there's some natives here who actually do pretty well. The dysfunction comes from the folks who are coming from outside. And for those of us who are from D.C., in order to get access to the vaccine early on, we needed to go ahead and sign up online. And you could sign up and hopefully, if you're fast enough at the beginning of the day at 9 o'clock, you're able to get yourself access to a vaccine. I did this, my siblings did this, we did this trying to get vaccine appointments for my parents. And my siblings were doing this online. I was trying to do it on a phone. And it was impossible to do it on the phone. You could only really do it online. Now that's two problems, right? Problem number one is we really need everyone to be able to connect online, because if you don't get that appointment, that really can be the difference between living and dying. The second problem, which is something that Blair mentioned earlier, is our services need to come and meet people where they are until we get them online. Because the fact that a website that's essential to helping you get access to vaccines is not something that's mobilely friendly is a problem. So all I'm saying is, like, there are a lot of problems. We have a plan that helps address many of them, not all of them. And then next year, the year after, we'll have new problems. And then we'll have to be able to come together like this and try to find a way to solve them too. Yeah, thanks.
Well, I look forward to solving this problem, putting it behind us, but then continuing to keep up with the digital divide so that it doesn't expand. Because as many as all of you have noted, it is about civil rights. The National Urban League believes that access to digital inclusion and equity is about civil rights, but it's also about human rights. It's as fundamental as having electricity or running water once was to the generations in the past. And so each of you is to be commended, because what you have done is you have made this just a conversation that we're all having, that we all have the tools to have, that is a household conversation. Never before do we want people sitting outside their library or third-party space or mall, trying to do the things that all of us, if I look around, are doing in our homes. We all deserve that privilege of being able to get telehealth, telework, being able to telework, being able to do homework at home, and a cell phone is not enough. Thank you so much for joining us today. We just could not thank you enough for your contributions to the Latimer Plan and also your contributions to the Legislative Policy Conference. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again to our panel. We've already talked a lot about the National Urban League's Latimer Plan, and now we're going to close out this session with a more intimate look at this initiative and how it's addressing the digital divide and who from the business community is supporting us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining the conversation. Roll tape.
Lewis Latimer is a name that you may not know.
Is a name you may not know.
Is a name you may not know.
A child of parents born into slavery, Latimer was a pioneering African-American inventor
whose technical innovations were critical to his employers.
Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell.
Of course, you know those names, and that's no accident.
Despite this brilliant innovator's contributions to the works of Edison and Bell,
Latimer had no ownership stake in the vast businesses they spawned and was left out of the history books.
For people of color, this is a familiar tragedy of exclusion and opportunity denied.
So here we are, a century later, systemic inequality made worse by this terrible pandemic
threatens to marginalize a new generation.
Without access to today's digital tech-centered economy, future Lewis Latimers are in danger of being excluded and denied opportunity.
The need was evident well before the pandemic, as poverty and limited local resources left millions of Americans outside the tech economy.
But the COVID crisis has exposed the digital divide and its disproportionate impact on communities of color.
At-home, reliable broadband can no longer be a luxury that only some can afford.
It's a necessity, fundamental to equity and inclusion.
The National Urban League developed the Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion to address this crisis.
The first step is universal broadband access.
Without broadband access, children can't fully engage with learning or keep pace with assignments.
People looking for a job can't network, they can't take advantage of skills training, they can't even apply for most jobs.
Small business owners can't apply for loans or market their services.
They simply can't compete on a level playing field.
Americans can't easily take advantage of telemedicine opportunities or vaccine registration.
The Latimer Plan is designed to put reliable, affordable broadband in every workspace.
In every workspace.
In every school.
In every school.
And in every home.
Universal broadband access means equity and opportunity.
It means Americans of every race,
income, and region
can participate fully in today's digital economy.
My name is Phoebe Young.
Clint Odom.
Virginia Lom Abrams.
Tanya Leah Lombard.
Fred Humphreys.
Grace Coe.
Dean Brenner.
Michelle Coburn.
Kumar Garg.
Stacy Pies.
Tony Williams.
And on behalf of T-Mobile,
Microsoft,
Amazon,
Starry,
AT&T,
Nokia,
Qualcomm,
Verizon,
Schmidt Futures,
Crown Castle,
Comcast NBC Universal.
We support the Latimer Plan
and believe that full access is the only path forward
if we are to achieve an inclusive society and open the doors of opportunity to all.
Before a show at the Rock in Central Tucson last night. Authorities say Lopez could have possibly overdosed.